I'm so delighted to be here. Delighted you all made it out this morning. People here have been really nice, privileged to be able to speak with you, to be considered, I guess, on some level, a marketing expert enough to be up here. And I'm wondering, was there some mix-up with the speaker lineup or something? Because I hate to tell you this, but I actually don't know jack shit about marketing. In fact, I don't even like it. Does anybody like marketing? 2 people in the audience like marketing. Okay. I'm inundated with it. What's the statistic? Average American sees like 5 trillion advertising marketing messages every day, something like that. I spend all day just trying to, clear the email marketing out of my inbox. It's like a full-time job to just reduce the size of that mountain. The idea that we would have to put ourselves out there and sell stuff, and that's something I hate even more than marketing is sales. And no offense to anybody who considers themselves a salesperson, but this is stuff that I really would like to avoid in life. I did it once. I sold band candy in junior high school for an entire Saturday. I went door to door, and I came up with this little routine. I told jokes, and I did this whole act, and people loved it. They laughed, and I sold a shit ton of candy. And I actually got 3rd place in the class contest, I guess, for who sold the most band candy. Thank you. Thank you. But I felt dirty afterwards because I had to hold out my hand and ask for money. And it was like I was sullying, I was besmirching the purity of my art by having to ask for money in exchange. I didn't like that. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to write. I wanted to do comedy. I wanted to produce comedy work, and I wanted audiences to discover it and love it. And I wanted critics to find it, and I wanted them to write about it. And I wanted them to invite me on their TV shows to talk about it. And I wanted to make a ton of money from doing that. That's all I wanted. I didn't want to do any marketing of it, or marketing of myself, or selling it to get it out there. So this became a pursuit for me, a lifetime pursuit, to somehow succeed in the comedy business without ever selling myself or doing any kind of marketing. And I've largely succeeded at that. And I want to tell you a little bit of that story, and maybe you can take something home from that maybe you can apply to your own work and your own life to do less marketing. So starting out, I had no way into the comedy industry. My family certainly had no connections. They had no money. We lived in the middle of nowhere in buttfuck, Wisconsin. And there was no internet back then, so you couldn't look up how to get into the comedy business like you can now. So I did what you did then. I went to the local library and I got a book on how to succeed in the entertainment business. My local library didn't have any books like that. In fact, they only had one book in the arts and recreation section of the Pierce County Library that had anything to do with that. It was How to Be a Ventriloquist. I got that book, of course, and devoured it, but not a practical skill I would recommend to anyone. What I decided, though, to do was focus on comic strips, kind of in spite of the ventriloquism book. I learned that comic strips was cheap. It was easy. Just pen and paper was all you needed. And also, in the newspaper, they would print the name of the syndicate that the comic strip came from. And these were things that weren't being sold. Nobody was marketing. The artists weren't marketing these things. They were just drawing comics, sending them into the syndicate, and the syndicate sent them out to newspapers. Perfect for me, right? So I would draw comic strips, and I would send them away. What you would do is you would look up or call information and ask for the address of the syndicate in the newspaper, get their address, and then you'd mail them your comic submission. Do you remember how we lived before the internet? Like savages. And then I would get a rejection letter back, and then I would scrap that comic strip idea, and I would come up with a whole different comic strip idea, and I would send it in, get another rejection letter back. And for years I did this. And eventually I did get a job at McDonald's. Now, strictly speaking, this was not the comedy business or entertainment business. What this was, strictly speaking, was the bathroom cleaning business. Because at this McDonald's, you start out as a porter, where you just clean the bathrooms first thing in the morning. You actually had to work your way up to the more elite jobs of cashier, grill, that sort of thing. But in my spare time, I kept doing comic strips. And eventually, finally, a newspaper, small college newspaper, I had lowered the bar by this point, decided that one of the comic strips that I had sent them was barely adequate enough to print. And they printed it on a trial basis for no pay, just to see if readers would like it. And by some miracle, it caught on. People liked it. And they asked me to do it daily, and they paid me. They paid me $5 a week. So I had made it. I was a professional in the comedy business, and all I was doing was drawing my comic and sending it to them. I wasn't doing any marketing, any sales of any kind. And eventually, the strip got to be really popular. I sold T-shirts with my character's likeness on them. When I had enough strips together, I put out a book collection of the strips, and I sent it to bookstores. And because the comic strip was so popular in the newspaper, I didn't have to sell it. They just were like, "Yeah, great. We'll take 25 copies or whatever." And they would call me when those copies sold. I sent the comic strip to other college newspapers, figuring, it did well in this newspaper where I was, which was Madison, Wisconsin, the Daily Cardinal. And I sent it to them for free. Just every week, I would send them all the comics. I knew how college newspapers worked. I knew that eventually what happens is they're putting together the paper the night before it goes to press, and they're like, "Oh my God, page 8 is empty." And here I had sent them all these comic strips, so they would just plaster them in there. And what had happened in Madison was, after the trial basis, people liked it. You can't pull a comic strip. That's the one thing in newspapers that makes people crazy. It's such a conservative industry because as soon as you pull a comic strip, people write angry letters. So if you can get your hooks in with a comic strip, you're in. And so just filling that empty page in those college newspapers, doing that enough, pretty soon I was syndicated to maybe 100 different college newspapers. So I'm doing great. I'm making a living as a cartoonist. So, and kind of a big man on campus in Madison for my comedy success. Not that unusual then that I was approached one day by these two very enterprising UW-Madison students who had this crazy idea to start a campus humor magazine. And they were working on it out of their dorm room. And the working title was The Rag. Tim and Chris were their names. We got talking about this new newspaper. They wanted me to do cartoons for it, maybe write for it, and I thought, great, this is more doing comedy. These guys were going to sell all the ads. All I had to do was create the comedy. But we started thinking The Rag is kind of a crude title. Maybe we should think of something different. And this name, The Onion, came about. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, Chris in particular, for breakfast every morning, he would eat raw onion on a piece of untoasted bread. That was his breakfast. And also, we went to the local printer to get a quote for printing a glossy, full-color magazine. That's what humor publications were at that time. They were magazines. And the quote came back something like $5,000 a week just for printing that. And we were like, okay, what's the cheapest kind of paper we could possibly print on? And they said newsprint. And we were disappointed. We were like, I guess this will have to be a humor newspaper, not a humor magazine. Nobody had ever heard of a humor newspaper before. But The Onion seemed like a good name for a newspaper because it's like you peel back the layers to get at the facts. It just really fits. I think it's a great name. I don't know why it's not in the pantheon of acceptable newspaper names like the Beacon or the Herald. It's such a great name for a newspaper. Even greater that we've ruined it now for everybody. Nobody can ever name their newspaper The Onion. It's so great. So I was the only person on The Onion's payroll for issue 1. I did 3 different comic strips under assumed names with different drawing styles, so it wouldn't look like a bad high school yearbook where the one kid who could draw was doing all the comics. But the rest of the paper, well, I didn't think it was that great. Tim and Chris were doing all the work. They were selling all the coupons that were keeping it afloat. They were pasting it up. They weren't sleeping. So it seemed kind of sloppy. But I figured, they'll get their bearings. they'll do all right. Second issue hit the streets, and I was legitimately concerned for them. A lot of typos, just seemed really slapped together. So before issue 3, I showed up at their door and I volunteered to fill a position that the Onion had not yet thought to fill, that of editor. And they were like, great, we're going to take a nap. And I became de facto editor of the Onion. Now, I found out later that Tim and Chris were actually planning for issue 3 to take a photo of the two of them mooning the camera and running that with a big banner headline, "Fuck you, readers, we quit." They had it. Tim's naked ass did end up appearing on the cover of issue 3, but it was for a totally different idea. I think he just wanted to be naked on the cover of his own newspaper. Can't blame him for that. But here I was, de facto editor of The Onion for a few months, and then Tim and Chris got real, and they said, we really have had enough of this, we want out. And so they offered to sell The Onion to me and a business partner for $3,000. And I thought, well, I'm putting all my effort into it anyway. I scraped together all the savings I had, and I gave them the $3,000. So now I owned and edited this humor publication. And myself and a few of the funny people I knew in town had to fill, 12, sometimes 16 pages a week of funny stories, contests, cartoons, whatever we could think of. It's really hard. That's a lot of pages to fill. Thankfully, other people around town saw what we were doing and did the same thing I did. They came and knocked on our door and volunteered to write for The Onion. Now, I hired all of them. I didn't pay them anything, but I hired them. Now, eventually, Onion writers did receive a salary, $5 a week was the going rate. A lot of people ask me where The Onion gets its writers, and I want to take just a little tangent and tell you where we find our writers, because the Onion writers are some of the finest writers of satire in the world. They've won the Thurber Prize, they've won a Peabody, and I know a lot of big businesses spend a lot of effort. They search high and low to find the top performers in their industry. They have business seminars about this stuff. It's like a big deal. So I just want to leave you with a little insight into our method. We did not search high and low. We just searched low. Dropouts, shut-ins, disaffected liquor store clerks, grocery store clerks who cracked up customers in line, like minimum wage slaves and service workers. These were our A players. And this is because they were bitter, they were smart, and they had no prospects in life. And we just wanted to hire the funniest people. We didn't care how messed up they were, how stable they were, and they were not stable. You find a lot of times people go into comedy, they go into it because they are recovering from some sort of emotional trauma that they suffered in childhood. They were abused or neglected, and they turned to comedy as a way to cope. Or maybe their dad left, and they subconsciously became funny as a way to win him back. There's all sorts of machinations, but they all came from broken homes. One of our writers, our head writer for many years, was clinically depressed and suicidal. I hired an agoraphobic, a conspiracy nut, a pathological liar. All of them at some point or another were on some kind of prescription antidepressant medication. One writer I remember sent me an email. The subject was, "Area loser wants job." I thought, kind of funny. Opened up the email, and he had a really funny list of headline submissions, so I called him up. Turns out he was pushing 30, lived in his mother's basement, too insecure to leave the house for like 10 years. And I'm thinking, just the kind of talent we're looking for. So I hired that guy. Now, an Onion writer's job responsibilities in those days was simple. Come to the weekly writers' meeting, pitch ideas, and write one story a week. Now, the funny thing is, because of the Onion culture, we're just always trying to be the funniest and produce an issue this week that is funnier than last week's. We engendered a real loyalty among our staff, and these writers worked so hard. And this is sort of part 2 of my secret to hiring the best people. I started by obsessively doing all this work myself, and this sort of created a center of gravity, like this force that pulled all these other funny people toward us, who wanted to help, who were compelled to help, much like I had been with Tim and Chris. Eventually, I was able to step back and be replaced by these people. All these people who were better and smarter and funnier than I was, which is a great strategy for becoming the dumbest person in your company, but also a great strategy for getting the best people. Leave them alone and let them do what they do. Let them do what they were born to do, what they were compelled to do because of some emotional need. They will succeed beyond your wildest aspirations. So you could go into the Onion office anytime, day or night in those days, and you could see a writer cranking away on a story, just trying to make it as funny as they possibly could. One of those early writers was a guy named Rich, who worked as a school bus driver during the day and wrote Onion stories all night. I literally don't know when he slept. Hardest working guy I've ever known. And a lot of times in those early days, it ended up just being me and Rich staying up late on weekend nights before the paper was due, drinking Cokes and eating pizzas, just trying to make each other laugh. We would drive the paste-up boards to the printer after, I don't know, some of you have probably pulled an all-nighter before. We used to do this thing regularly at the Onion we called the all-weekender, where you didn't sleep from Friday to Monday because you're just pushing and pushing to finish the paper and make it as good as you can possibly be. Being at the Onion then was kind of like being in production on a very poorly planned, low-budget independent film continuously. And we were starting to get a little bit of ad revenue. One of those advertisers I remember paid in cash, which seemed really weird at the time, but then found out years later this advertiser had been indicted for cocaine laundering. But there we were. And, another early writer I want to tell you about was Carol. I discovered Carol through her street art. She would do these crazy stunts that I couldn't help but notice. She started a toilet paper museum in her house. When she would go on vacation, she would steal a roll of toilet paper from the restroom at some landmark like Mount Rushmore or Graceland or whatever, and she would display it. She would write where it came from and display it in her house. People heard about this, and they would send her toilet paper when they went on vacation. So in time, she had a pretty impressive collection. She had the Louvre, she had the Great Wall of China, she had the White House. Okay, this was a serious collection. The White House toilet paper was in a special glass case. And she would give you a tour of her toilet paper museum if you went to her house. And I saw her doing this on the local news. They had found out about it and just wanted to showcase this. If that wasn't enough, another stunt that Carol did was in front of her apartment in the grassy median, she dug a hole. It was like 1.5 feet in diameter, a couple feet deep, and there was a little sign next to the hole. And it said, "Who took our baby?" There was more text under that. Who's not going to read that text? So you read it, and it says, "Their precious newborn infant died, and they buried her here in the grassy median, and some monster dug her up. Please bring her back." So with writers like these, perhaps you can imagine the Onion started to get into a little bit of trouble for some of the things that we were printing. We got in trouble with the governor of Wisconsin. We planned a big front page story, "Governor proclaims November Masturbation Month." And needed a picture of the governor to go with that story, so I called the governor's office and spoke to his press secretary, a guy by the name of John Hankus. And he said, "Oh, the Onion, huh? Oh, yeah, I've seen you around town." No, I'm not going to give you a photo. I thought, all right, kind of a jerky thing to do. But I went to the local daily newspaper, and they had a whole file of photos of the governor, one of them at a podium going like this, perfect for the story. So much better than the standard politician mugshot, in front of the flag that we would have gotten from John Hankus. So we put that photo on the front page, and I thought, just for kicks, just little letters on the side of the photo I wrote, "Special thanks to John Hankus." And I'll tell you, when that issue hit the streets, I got a really angry phone call from John Hankus, threatening to sue us out of existence, demanding a retraction. So in the next issue of The Onion, on the inside cover, we ran this little box that simply said, "Last week, The Onion erroneously reported that the governor had proclaimed November Masturbation Month. It was a reporter's error." In fact, he had proclaimed it Sodomy Month. Special thanks to John Hankus for alerting us to this correction. Now, we got some press attention from that incident, but our legal troubles did not end there. We got a knock on our door one day. We had moved into this small basement office, and it was this very serious, imposing-looking attorney in a three-piece suit, graying temples, the works. And he says, I understand that you've reproduced a photograph of my client, Ginger Rogers, without her express written permission. I'm here to find evidence of that infringement and use it in a court of law when I sue you out of existence. We heard that phrase a lot in those days. And he barges in the office and starts rifling through our pile of back issues. And meanwhile, I'm terrified because I know exactly what photo he's talking about. We ran this photo of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing in the worst possible way. We ran it in an advertisement that we had made for a local hamburger place. And as you probably know, you can't do that. You use a celebrity's likeness in an ad, it implies endorsement, and you lose that case. It's open shut. So I'm thinking, all right, well, it was fun while it lasted. And he gets up from the back issue pile and he says, well, you know, I had it on good authority you'd run that photo, but I can't find it. And you know what? I'm glad, because I think what you kids are doing is hilarious. Oh, that thing with the governor. You know. And perhaps out of guilt, this attorney, Ken was his name, decided at that moment to be our pro bono legal counsel. Every issue that we put out from that day forward, he would look at and let us know if he thought there was anything in it that was actionable. And he would defend us against any big companies that came after us and tried to sue us out of existence like he had. And he defended us a lot. So Taco Bell wanted to sue us. They did not like our front page story. Taco Bell introduces new morning after burrito. Yeah. The Contraceptimelt was a food item that, if ingested within 24 hours of intercourse, would terminate an unwanted pregnancy. And we got this angry call from this lawyer and passed the phone to Ken, and he just makes it go away. It's like 15 minutes on the phone, and this guy disappears forever. Ken is a miracle worker. He's a master attorney. We got another call from a very highfalutin Beverly Hills attorney who had a client, very famous female pop singer, whose name I'm barred from revealing due to a non-disclosure agreement. Suffice it to say, very famous, still very famous female pop singer. And he said, look, my client did not like your front page story. Area 13-year-old will get his wish, will pork, insert name of famous female pop singer. And I understand that you're a humor publication and you have the right from our First Amendment to make fun of my client, who's a public figure. However, she is very rich and may simply want to sue you into oblivion to make a point. And I thought, there's a new phrase. Sue us into oblivion. Passed the phone to Ken. After 20 minutes, these two lawyers are laughing, sharing stories of their childhood. The guy orders a subscription to The Onion. We never hear from him again. So I get some insight into how Ken works when The Onion did a parody of a fine dining issue. It was like parodies of restaurant reviews, that sort of stuff. The front page was an interview that we had done with a local butcher where he revealed to us, inadvertently, he didn't know we were journalists, telling us which restaurants in town he sold the grade D meat to and the grade C meat. He's listing them by name. And we put his picture on the front page with that interview. Now, I've learned since that one of the rules of journalism, apparently, is that you're supposed to tell people when they're going to be interviewed and they're going to be in the newspaper. We didn't know. And he was pissed. He called up and he said, oh, you're going to ruin me. These are my customers. And he threatened to sue us. So I told Ken, and Ken thinks about it for a second, and he says, let me have $300 cash. I'll take care of it by the end of the week. All right, plenty of cocaine money lying around. I give him $300 cash. And here's what he does. He goes into that butcher when the guy is working there. And he sees the guy, and he says, hey, I saw you in The Onion. And the guy's like, oh yeah, those kids are going to pay for that. And Ken says, boy, when I saw that, I thought, now there's a butcher I can trust. There's a butcher who tells it like it is. Let me have 3 of the grass-fed steaks, some veal. He proceeds to order $300 worth of meat. We never hear from the guy again. Meanwhile, Ken eats like a king for weeks. Now, we got some attention in the press for some of this legal trouble. But our revenue increased. Our brand awareness increased. And eventually, we were able to give our writers a raise. The pay skyrocketed to $15 a week. But with that increased pay came increased responsibility. They still had to come to the weekly writers' meeting, pitch ideas, and write 1 story a week, but now they had to do it sober. Now, they could come baked out of their gourd. That I didn't mind. You know, I didn't need to unnecessarily take any tools out of my writer's toolbox. But no drinking. And there was a reason for that. Case in point was a writer named Cal. So Cal was one of these people who was so funny. It's like one of the funniest people you've ever met. Not just funny on the page, but funny in person. Like his whole life was a performance comedy act. I'll give you a couple of examples. So he hated the idea of greeting cards. Just thought they were awful. The idea that you would pay some corporate hack to write a note to your friend or loved one just drove him insane. So he decided the only way to properly satirize that was to create his own greeting card company. And they were the funniest greeting cards. Now, I don't want to misrepresent his effort. It was pathetic. They were written on lined notebook paper and folded himself, you know, ballpoint pen. Some of the fringes were still on the paper sometimes. But very funny. One of the cards I remember, on the front it said, "Happy birthday." And when you open it on the inside, it said, "From me and Dean." And then below there, he taped a driver's license that he had found formerly belonging to some guy named Dean. Now that's a great birthday card. Who wouldn't want to get that? Another example. So around this time, The Onion had created the AV Club, which was the back half of the newspaper where we reviewed movies and TV shows and records. It legitimized the comedy part of the paper. But we, as a result of that, started getting swag from all the big TV, movie, record companies to try to bribe us into writing good reviews of their crappy movies, TV shows, and records. And we hated this. Cal, in particular, just hated the corruptness of this and just the gross effort on their part to market their products. Hated it. And one day we received this giant box, the most egregious example ever. It was a box of T-shirts to promote this stupid stoner movie with Dave Chappelle and Jim Brewer in it. It was called Half Baked. These were the most hideous T-shirts you've ever seen in your life. They were this garish, like ultraviolet purple with this bold, like green and yellow lettering, huge letters that just said, "Get stoned." They were just horrible. Cal decided the only way to properly satirize the sheer awfulness of everything these T-shirts represented was to wear one every day for the rest of his life. So he took the box home, the whole box, and every day from thereafter you'd see him wearing one of these shirts. For months this went on. Into the winter months, he'd wear it over a sweater so you'd always have to see it. And he'd come into the room and it would just be this eyesore. Well, eventually, as Cal was wont to do, he came stumbling home drunk and passed out in his bedroom. And his roommates couldn't take it anymore. They took the shirt off his body, collected all the other shirts from his room, and burned them in a giant bonfire in front of his house, thus ending that particular comedy experiment. We had another writer at that time by the name of Ben. Now, Ben was cut from a different cloth entirely from the rest of our writers. He was emotionally stable. He was well-dressed. He was well-groomed. He was clean. He came from our business office, actually, but what he really wanted to do was write comedy, so he would show up at the writers' meetings, and the other writers resented this terribly. They're like, "What's this business guy doing coming to our meeting?" And he had kind of a tin ear for comedy, but he kept coming at it, he kept coming, he kept trying, he kept getting better, because our culture of like be the funniest, engendered this idea in him to just keep working at it and keep perfecting his craft. And he did get better, and he learned from the other writers. Beyond that, he was good with people, so he was a good manager, and he met his deadlines, which was very unusual at The Onion at that time. And eventually, it became a choice I had to make to hire a new assistant editor. I had groomed Cal for the job, but Ben came up fast, and now I had these two options. I had, on the one hand, Ben, the well-dressed guy with the social skills, who didn't seem to have any comedy talent, versus Cal, the guy in the hideous half-baked t-shirt, but who was clearly the funniest guy in the room. Now, you would think that, given The Onion's philosophy, I would have hired Cal, but I did not. At this time, The Onion was planning a big makeover. We're going to do Onion 2.0. We were going to get rid of all the sort of wacky college humor. We were going to stick with this AP parody style that was working really well for us. That was when we were at our funniest. So the higher calling here was how to make The Onion the funniest. And Ben shared this vision and helped me get some of the other writers' stories into this shape for this new Onion. Cal, on the other hand, would sometimes not show up for like 3 or 4 days in a row on a drinking bender and stumble in on Sunday when the paper was due and slap it all together in an afternoon. And it would be pretty funny, but I knew we were never going to take The Onion to the next level with a guy like Cal at the helm. So I gave the job to Ben because I knew that would make The Onion funnier, and offered Cal the opportunity to stay on as a writer, but he was pissed. He was a comedy purist, and he actually quit comedy forever. But he did give Ben a nice card. On the cover, it said, "Congratulations on getting my job." And on the inside, it said, "You fucking prick." I hope Ben still has that job, that card. So he doesn't have the job. So it was around that same time that I became consciously aware of what we were doing. We had sent out a few press releases to try to get some attention for what we were doing, but they never worked. Anytime we had tried to artificially gin up some publicity, it never worked. It only worked when we would do these outrageous things, when we lived out the full meaning of our brand identity, that people would notice and people would write about it. So I decided, we're going to stop sending out press releases. We're just going to do things that are worthy of press attention. And the press is going to discover these stories and write about it, because the press loves discovering things. They don't want to be told by some marketing person what to write about. And this largely worked. In the year 2000, or thereafter, we started getting into web video. This is a new thing. The bandwidth was available. Funny or Die started up in the mid-2000s, where you could actually serve up videos. And this was great for us as a whole new avenue, a whole new medium where we could do comedy. Super exciting. We created this whole other arm of the company, a whole new staff, and kind of reinvented the voice of The Onion. The Onion voice was always like a parody of USA Today, but the Onion videos were more of a parody of Fox News. And we got a lot of attention for our videos when we first put them out. What we discovered was there was this whole other audience, this whole other demographic that we had never reached before, and that is people who don't read. And apparently there's a lot of people like that in America, people who had never read The Onion before because they just simply don't read. They only get their information from flashing, moving, colorful pictures. So in starting this new arm of The Onion that was video-based, we quintupled our audience and reached all these people who were discovering The Onion for the first time. And we found that we experienced some of the same issues that we had experienced early with the founding of the print edition, when people would get really upset because they were being made fun of. But it was a little different this time. Now they were getting upset because they were confused, thinking it was real news. This is what was happening now. One of our earlier videos was a parody of a morning show. It was called Today Now, and we did a story about how the Make-A-Wish Foundation was going bankrupt because one kid had wished for unlimited wishes. And the show was produced very realistically. They had this lawyer come on to talk about it, And he was saying, oh yeah, we're really under a barrel here. We had to buy him an F-18 Hornet, battleship. We had this whole legal team to fight him, and he wished away our legal team, so. I got a really angry phone call from the head of the Make-A-Wish Foundation saying that his funders are calling him saying, what's going on? Are you going out of business? And he urged us to take the video down, and I said, I can't take the video down. We donated a bunch of money to him, but I told him we're going to keep the video up. And he had to put a big message on the front page of his website that said, it's from The Onion. The Make-A-Wish Foundation does not grant unlimited wishes. The Onion seems to fool the nation of China quite a bit. I don't know what it is about the Chinese, but here's what happens. So we did this big front page story about how the US Congress was threatening to leave Washington if the city didn't build them a new Capitol building with stadium seating and a retractable dome and all this stuff. They'd go somewhere like Omaha where they'd be treated better. And the Beijing Times, at the time, the largest circulation newspaper in the world, reran that story verbatim. They even ran the image that we had created for it, this elaborate Adobe Illustrator image showing what they wanted with the retracting dome and the hot dog stands around the balconies. A couple of years ago, The Onion named Korean dictator Kim Jong-un the world's sexiest man alive. And the official news agency of China reran the story verbatim. They ran all our photos. They even added some of their own sexy photos of the dictator to augment the coverage. And the crazy thing about when they discover that they've been had is they get very confused. They don't get it. So after that Capitol Dome story ran on the inside cover of the Beijing Times, they ran a little correction box that said, apparently, there are newspapers in America that print lies. Now, before I wrap up, I want to give you just a little update on some of the writers that I told you about. So, like, where are they now? This writer, Tom, who I discovered in his mother's basement. We hired him, lured him out of the basement, brought him to Madison, Wisconsin. He joined our staff, and then he made the move to New York with us, and we moved to New York in 2001. And then he went on to be a writer for the Conan O'Brien Show and for David Letterman. He's had a very fruitful career in comedy. Carol went out to Hollywood to try to make it as a TV writer, but didn't get a lot of traction. She ended up coming back to The Onion. We hired her back to be the head writer of our web videos, and she did that for a few years. After the success of those, she was able to go to Hollywood and do really well. She got hired on Dimitri Martin's show, on The Kroll Show. She wrote for Community. She's a very in-demand comedy writer. Rich, first writer I ever hired, hardest working guy I've ever known. He also went out to Hollywood, tried to make it as a comedy writer in the industry. I think he left a little early because he just had trouble getting traction and ended up coming back to the Midwest, getting a job cleaning apartments. Very hardworking guy. Ben, who edged out Cal for the job of assistant editor, probably did best of all. He went out to Hollywood at just the right time. And he was good with people, so he was able to finesse relationships with agents. And he got a meeting with Jon Stewart right before Jon Stewart took over The Daily Show from Craig Kilborn. And what Jon wanted for The Daily Show was to make it more like The Onion, to make it like the serious news show. Under Craig Kilborn, it had been more like a late-night talk show. And he knew Ben had helped me do that at The Onion, so he hired Ben to be his executive producer and showrunner of The Daily Show, where he worked for many years. He won many Emmys. While he was there, he co-created The Colbert Show with Stephen. He couldn't run both shows, so he hired Rich out of his apartment cleaning job to be the showrunner of The Colbert Show, where he also worked for many years and won many Emmys. And now there are Onion writers in so many different TV comedy shows. They write novels, they write movies. They've really, they pervade the industry. The Onion has sort of become the new Harvard Lampoon in that way. It's a real stepping stone. So The Onion has a marketing person now. They hired one about 4 years ago. She sends out press releases and does what marketing people do. But The Onion still gets the most attention when it does funny, outrageous things, when it lives out the purpose of its brand, when George W. Bush sent us a cease and desist letter. That got us a huge feature in the New York Times. When Donald Trump threatened to sue us a couple of years ago, a lot of press coverage. Marketing gold. Sean Spicer very recently retweeted an Onion story as if it were true. We get a lot of press coverage for this. At The Onion, the company culture is the brand identity. They're kind of one and the same. The goal is to just be as funny as we can possibly be. We hire the funniest people, and those people do the funniest things they can possibly do, and they go off in the industry and they make the industry funnier. This has been our unintended strategy for success, not doing any marketing. So lest you leave here today thinking that, well, that's The Onion, they're a crazy, wild media company, they can get away with doing this sort of thing. I want to just give you one example, but there are many, of how this works in any company. I'll select the opposite of The Onion, Walgreens. So a very boring company, has nothing to do with any entertainment industry or comedy or anything. So their brand is convenience. They're going to be the most convenient. And so they'll always put a Walgreens on the corner with a big parking lot so it's easy to get to. They never are in the middle of a crowded street. A few years ago, they started doing deliveries of pharmaceuticals. No one had ever done that before because they're thinking outside the box. Well, how can we be outrageously convenient? How can we live our brand? And recently, they partnered with some app so you can get any product from Walgreens without leaving your bed. Like, that's convenient. People are going to talk about that, and you don't even need to send out a press release for that. You know, somebody's like, I called up Walgreens and asked if they had Epsom salts, and they brought it to my house. You know, that's the sort of thing people are going to talk about. That's magic. So the takeaway that I want to leave you with is, what's your brand? You know, what's the most outrageous thing you can do that's within the character of your brand? Play that part to the hilt, and you may never have to do marketing again. Thank you.
All right, raise your hand if you have any questions for Scott Dikkers, and we'll have some microphones going around. While we're waiting for that, let me ask you a first question.
Yeah, please.
A lot of what we talked about, I think the reason why it's probably funny is because you're tapping into this real eternal truth that we all kind of know, but we've never really expressed. And I think that's what we have to do in marketing as well for our products, like find that eternal truth for the customers, but find a way to express it. So what's your process? Well, what do you go through for that?
Yeah, you know, you mentioned millennials and Generation X earlier. Like, authenticity is so important to them. And that works so beautifully with comedy because comedy doesn't work if it's not authentic. If you're faking it or if the subtext of your comedy somehow doesn't ring true with people, the joke isn't going to work. They're not going to laugh. People only laugh when it makes some kind of connection to like, oh yeah, you know? So yeah, those two things are very intertwined, I feel.
Yeah, perfect. See, any questions out there in the audience?
Everybody's already too hungover and tired. No, there's a couple of people.
All right, well, great. Well, hopefully some of you will be joining us for, we got one right there.
Like I said, he gave up comedy forever. He became a designer. Yeah, so just like totally gave up comedy. Now, he gave up professional comedy. I have discovered recently that he has started posting like tweets and he started a blog under a totally fake name that's hilarious. And I wish I could remember the name so I could tell it to you, but I don't remember it. But just like outrageous, crazy, any kind of humor now that really breaks through is totally fresh, totally original. And he gets that. So he's doing this stuff that you're looking at and you're like, what is that? And then after a while, you get it. A good example of that is the website Liartown USA. It's a blog. If you've never seen it, do yourself a favor. Check out Liartown USA. It's so fresh and so original and so different, but you will laugh yourself silly. But that's what he's doing now. But his day job is design.
So we have another question over there.
Is there anything that's taboo? Is there a line that you don't cross?
No. You can make a joke about anything as long as the target of your joke is a deserving target. And in just about any situation, you name it, whether it's like rape or child abuse or genocide, whatever it is, there's some actor in that mix that either deserves blame or ridicule or is at fault. And we learned that the hard way, because in our early days, we were picking on the wrong target, because we didn't know what we were doing. We were sort of making this shit up as we went along. But that's the secret sauce right there.
Any other questions?
We have one over here.
Got one over there.
Hi. So one of the most important things in comedy is obviously the delivery. And so for you, could you talk a little bit about how much or how little you may adapt a piece of editorial for its different methods of delivery, whether it be for the
I
site?
missed the last few words there.
How much or how little you adapt an editorial piece for its method of delivery or its channel in which you deliver it to the audience?
So yeah, delivery in comedy, like timing in comedy is everything. That's what they always say. But in print, which is how we started, it's still the Onion's bread and butter, you have no control over the timing. People are going to read it whenever they want. They're going to read it at whatever pace they want. So you have to really kind of reach out your tentacles and control as much as possible the context in which people get your comedy. So we created this whole frame around it, this fake newspaper that had this fake sense of like, this is very important news. This is not a time for laughter. Because we knew that that frame makes people want to laugh. It's like you don't laugh, you're not supposed to laugh in church or in school, but that's when you laugh the hardest, right? So we tried to create that frame. And it's different in every medium, but print is the hardest, because you have no control over the delivery. Any other medium, it becomes super easy. Whether it's like stand-up comedy or video or even podcasting, once you have a human voice or actors or anything, it's like putty in your hands, how to deliver the message exactly how you want, make a connection with people. But if you've mastered the print craft, you can do that other stuff like nothing.
Anything else out there?
Yep, right here.
Run down over there.
I really enjoyed your presentation. Outside of the Onion,
Where are you? I'm sorry, I can't see you.
I'm over
In
here.
the back, by the table there.
Hello.
Hi. Outside of the Onion, where do you get your laughs from? What makes you laugh?
Outside of the Onion, what?
Yeah. Is there a particular TV show or a particular comedian?
Oh, is there anything that I think is funny?
Yeah, outside of the Onion.
Yeah, well, I mentioned Liartown USA. That would be my website pick. As far as TV, boy, there's not a lot. There's not a lot. I do like Bill Burr, comedian. I think he's great. Louis C.K. is great. Aziz Ansari is great. I thought 30 Rock was a really good show. It's gone now. Parks and Rec. The British version of The Office was amazing. I never saw the American version. I think Steve Carell is great, and I know him from our days back in the 90s in the Midwest, but never saw his show. Movies, I can't really, Will Ferrell, I love his movies. I think they're great. Adam McKay, I think, is a genius. It's Will Ferrell's partner.
We got another one over there.
Okay.
Yeah, so you talked about how you guys stepped into videos when you were trying to kind of get people to actually interact with your publication. So I was just wondering what's on the horizon, what's next for The Onion?
You said videos were next, how you got people to interact with your publication. So what do you think's on the horizon? What's coming up next?
Got it. Yeah, so we've always been on the lookout for how to make what we do more accessible to people. That's kind of what it's all about, especially when you're starting in print comedy, because it's really hard to get people to read. It often feels like homework to people. So all of our other media, like if it's a podcast or if it's videos, a lot of it is like a funnel, a sales funnel for bringing people back to the print, to buy our books or to go to our website or whatever. And the new frontier, obviously, was the internet. We went online in '95. We were the very first humor website. we're doing all this content in print, and the web came about as this thing, and we were thinking, all right, we'll just put everything we do in print on this website. But we didn't start acting like an actual website, doing all that Web 2.0 stuff that you're supposed to do, interact with customers and all that, until 2012. That's when we finally realized, what's this Facebook I keep hearing about? How do you get a Twitter account? Somebody sign us up for that? And we started actually doing that. And that became a big thing. That our readership really ballooned after we started actually engaging with the audience. Because the whole conceit of The Onion was that it was this ivory tower handing you down the information and you didn't have a voice in it. That was kind of part of our comedy conceit. So it was tricky getting over that. Recently, what The Onion has done is created new products. We started this website called Clickhole, which is a parody of like BuzzFeed and other clickbait culture. So it's, finding things out there in the world that need to be made fun of, that aren't being served. It's like any business, you find the need and you fill it. So that's the sort of stuff we're doing now.
We have time for one last question over there.
Do you have a favorite headline or some favorite headlines?
I will give you one. There are many, but here's my favorite headline. And I encourage you all to go Google this and read it, because it's such a funny story, super funny story. The headline, it was one of our editorials, so it's not a news piece, editorial piece, and the headline was, it was written by the CEO of the Gillette Razor Company, and the headline was, "Fuck it, we're doing 5 blades." The great thing about that story, first of all, the story was hilarious. The character, the chutzpah of that guy is priceless. He was just so brash. But the great thing about that story is that when we wrote it, we thought it was an outrageous idea. About 6 months later, Gillette unveiled a 5-bladed razor. And real life is always funnier than comedy. No matter how funny you think what you just made up is, real life always going to beat it, always going to be funnier. So when real life actually mimics what you do, you've hit some kind of standard in the comedy arts that makes me very proud when I do that. So, all right, well, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you, Daniel.
Good job.